thank you. Thank you, Savita, and your friends for this invitation. So, as Savita said, the paper, she wanted me to read this paper, but after that she realized that that paper was too... long for this meeting, so perhaps it's better that I say something about my current activities and my current research interests, which are many. At Sapienza, University of Rome, I'm professor of Sanskrit, and I belong to a very important parampara, and whenever I give lectures in India, I pay homage to my guru and Paramaguru. My guru is Raniero Agnoli, the Paramaguru is Giuseppe Tucci, well known, and they were the holders of the chair of Sanskrit before me. I'm also the coordinator of the doctoral school in Indian studies, so I can say that many brilliant young Indologists coming from the so-called Roman school now are disseminated all over Europe and also in outside Europe in dealing with different subjects, because I don't intend to create replicas of myself, but I try to launch my students also in different fields, quite different fields, so I'm able to learn from them a lot of things in fields I know after 2-3 years of research. They know those matters much better than I, and I like this because I'm not jealous of my students. I'm very happy when I can learn something from them. So my students, some of them now, they are professors in Naples and other Italian universities. One of my best former students now teach Sanskrit at Cambridge, and other now in Leiden, Dr. Cuneo teaches at Leiden, and so on and so on. So these different fields are, for example, Buddhist epistemology, Indian aesthetics, classical aesthetics, and Abhinava Bharati, Mimamsa, one of my most brilliant students. Now she's in Vienna. Now she has become a very good expert in Mimamsa, working on Ramanuja, the Mimamsaka Ramanuja. Then another of my students is now working on the critical edition of the Nyaya Manjari by Jayanta Bhatta. Another one on the critical edition of the Nyaya Bhashya. So then some of my students are dealing with my favorite subjects, and perhaps the subject for which I probably more well known is Tantra, particularly Kashmir Shaivism. And in the last years, most of my activity has been concentrated on Utpaladeva. Utpaladeva had been supposed to be the predecessor of Abhinavagupta, because the focus in the Indian tradition, and particularly among Indian people, Indian scholars, is on Abhinavagupta. That's why, for example, tomorrow we'll start an important big conference on Abhinavagupta, a 3 days conference at the IJNCA, But I'm more and more convinced that the main figure of Kashmir Shaivism is not Abhinavagupta, but Utpaladeva. I discovered the only extant fragment, because I work mainly on unpublished sources. And some years ago I discovered a quite long fragment of one of the most important works of Indian philosophy as a whole, is the long commentary of Utpaladeva on his own Ishvara Pratibhijna Karika. On this long commentary, Abhinavagupta wrote his Vivriti Vimarshini. Vivriti Vimarshini is one of the most important, most demanding work of Indian philosophy, something like 1,200 pages of difficult, very dense Sanskrit. The problem is that this is a commentary on a work which is now lost. So, before my recent studies, we couldn't understand what belonged to Abhinavagupta and what belonged to Utpaladeva. Now, after my edition of this long fragment, published in 5 articles, published in various felicitation volumes in Europe, India and Japan, it now is quite clear that Abhinavagupta only develops ideas which were created by Utpaladeva. So the focus is Utpaladeva. And I went so far as to define Abhinavagupta the brilliant commentator of Utpaladeva. No? So this has been and still is one of my main topics. We published last year here in India the proceedings of the first ever Utpaladeva conference held in Shimla. I was visiting professor 3 times, and on one of my visits we organized, Bettina Boimer and me, we organized the first international conference on Utpaladeva. The proceedings have been published by DK Printworld last year, and I think that for the first time Utpaladeva now has the place in the history of Indian philosophy that he deserves. Then I started within my interest for tantric studies, but by tantric studies I mean that particularly complex and culturally rich tradition which is the Kashmiri tradition, because what the Utpaladeva, Abhinavagupta and Jayarata and a few Ksemaraja did was to integrate Tantra philosophy, non-dualistic Tantra philosophy, with Indian philosophy. And not only Indian philosophy, but a great place has been assigned to aesthetics. So this mixture of philosophical traditions, tantric tradition, aesthetical tradition, epistemological tradition makes the study of non-dual Kashmir Shaivism so fascinating and so difficult, because you have to cover a lot of expertises, and to be an expert in Tantra is not enough. You should be conversant with all Indian Shastras. So, one of the last interests and last papers I was on the concept of purity, the opposition purity and impurity in the Indian context, particularly in the Tantric context. What is purity in Tantra is a reply to the concept of purity in the Brahmanical mainstream India. Then I'm also quite interested in the crossing of traditions, because I realized very soon, when I started my studies in Indian philosophy, that Indian philosophy is an ever-changing, so we can't speak about Nyaya by knowing Nyaya alone, and it's a kind of doxographical attitude, because in India there is a continuous interchange of ideas, and all the schools are ready to reformulate themselves. You can, for example, when the classical Nyaya met Dinnaga and Dharmakirti, there was a shock, but this shock created a kind of very strong and very interesting reaction in the realism of Nyaya. So India is so lively, the tradition. Then in the case of Shaivism, I focus my attention on an extremely interesting and unique figure in Pancharatra. Pancharatra, you know, is the tantric school of Vaishnavism, and there is a unique example of a Pancharatra master, a Vaishnava master, cited and considered as a guru by Abhinavagupta himself. So, a Saiva who accepts as a guru a Vaishnava. This is in the Indian tradition is a unique case. So I started studying this very enigmatic figure. Okay. We have only one work by Vamanadatta called Sambit Prakasha, written in Kashmir around the 10th century. I'm still working on the critical edition of the Sambit Prakasha, based on 3 different manuscripts, two found in India and one in Göttingen library. And this is a beautiful work. Beautiful, I mean, also from the poetical and literary point of view. It's a kind of philosophy written in a Kavya style, with a love for paradox, and so it's very extremely difficult and extremely interesting. This Sambit Prakasha has been published some years ago by a colleague. I don't want to mention his name because this colleague was so nice as to use the manuscripts as I gave him for his personal reference, and he published his own edition of this. But this edition is so bad that I think if we compare my own edition and his edition, it looks like 2 different works. So this Vamanadatta is at the moment the one of the centers of my activity. I published very recently, maybe 2 months ago, the first article dealing with the figure of Vamanadatta according to my own research. This has been published in Vienna in the proceedings of a panel held at the Delhi conference, the Delhi World Sanskrit Conference. Then another topic I'm quite interested in is the confluence between religious experience and aesthetic. And this will be the topic of my talk at the Abhinavagupta conference in 2 days, yes. And again on Abhinavagupta, I have studied for a lecture I recently gave at Cornell University in the States, the conception of yoga according to Abhinavagupta. So, what is the attitude of Abhinavagupta towards yoga? And this is very interesting because in the criticism, very strong criticism that Abhinavagupta makes of Patanjala yoga, we can understand a lot of what is behind Patanjala yoga and what is behind the tantric attitude to yoga. No, is a kind of dismissal of yoga, but not to cancel yoga as a whole, but to propose a totally different kind of yoga. So these are more or less the thing I'm dealing with now. I think the paper, I can send you the PDF. If you are interested, you can read the paper. It's some 30 pages long. It's very complex with a lot of Sanskrit quotations and so on. Not suitable for to be read. It was her. She was the culprit. The title is very interesting, but it's better to read it than to listen to it. Okay, I think that I can finish by this. Yes.
Can you a little bit of the connections in general about the paper, not reading from the paper, but
from this paper, yes.
a little bit about living tradition, etc.
About, you mean about the topic of my paper? Just to, in principle.
Present a small, at least some ideas.
Yes.
Give a summary of
Summary.
Is it interesting argument that you have presented here?
Yes, let's say that all Indian traditions, apart from Mimamsa, they admit yogi pratyaksha. No? What is yogi pratyaksha? Is the capacity for the humans to have access to what is beyond experience, and in a sense also what is beyond the reach of human mind. Because there is one kind of yogi pratyaksha which is only in intensification of sensorial activity. For example, by yogi pratyaksha you can see very distant objects, you can see very small objects. But of course this is not what the mainstream of Indian tradition is interested in. The main problem within yogi pratyaksha is for Mimamsa that if there is this possibility in human mind to have access to what is atindriya, and what is atindriya par excellence for Mimamsa is the Dharma. Can we have direct access to Dharma, or we have to use, let's say, Mimamsa as a kind of intermediate between the revelation, and the revelation of the Veda is not accessible to us. We can't go straight to the Veda, but we should have access to the Veda through a tradition. No? So this is the main reason why the Veda strongly objects to yoga, to yogi pratyaksha. What is interesting is that the objection against yogi pratyaksha starts in Mimamsa only at a certain point of its history, when the epistemological traditions of Buddhism starts. At the time of Dinnaga, because Dinnaga lists yogi pratyaksha as one of the varieties of pratyaksha. So only after that they start criticizing strongly this yogi pratyaksha, not before. This means that they were not interested at all in particularly strong capacities of seeing distant things or to have supernatural experiences, but when yogi pratyaksha becomes a kind of menace of threatening to the role of intermediation between Veda revelation and humans, represented by Mimamsa, only at that time Mimamsa starts fighting against. Quindi yogi pratyaksha becomes very soon yogi pratyaksha rishi jnana and savajna. The relationship between these three terms from Dinnaga onwards, particularly from Dharmakirti, is very close. So there is a very interesting polemics particularly between Kumarila and the Yogavartika, but not only Kumarila, also in between Vachaspati Mishra as commentator of the Nyaya in the Nyaya Kanika against, and you can see probably the most brilliant Indian minds. In my opinion, when somebody asks me who are the most brilliant Indian minds, in my ideal list, there is Kumarila, there is Dharmakirti, there is Abhinavagupta, no? There is Bhartrihari, and with a great scandal by Indian Pandits, I don't include Shankara in this kind of constellation. Shankara is much less original than all these people. And so I'm, for example, Bhartrihari is a very giant in Indian. And one of my former students is now publishing the critical edition and English translation of the Sadhana Samudesha of the Vakyapadiya, along with Hela Raja's commentary. So Bhartrihari is probably the most important linguist of mankind, so I'm convinced about this. And recently, with a leading expert in Saussure, we gave as a subject of thesis possible relationship between Saussure and Indian philosophy of language, because of the consonance of Saussure and Bhartrihari is impressive. But it seems that Saussure never met with Bhartrihari. So but this is another topic. So in Saiva Tantra, comes into this dispute particularly between Mimamsa and Buddhist, with its own ideas, and what is very interesting is that in principle Abhinavagupta and the non-dual tradition of Kashmir admits the possibility of having access to supreme reality by ourselves, without intermediation of scripture and guru, just in principle. But if we read carefully what the Saiva tradition says, okay, this is in principle, this is possible, but the existence of such a master, no, is so rare and also so difficult to stand, that in the end Abhinavagupta says in the end of this article, okay, the highest master is the akalpita master. The akalpita master is the master endowed with pratibha. Pratibha can be considered a kind of synonymous with yogi pratyaksha and rishi jnana and so on. This master, in principle, this akalpita master is possible, and with an akalpita master is enough to cross the ice to get liberation, no? Without any practice, without any shastra, without nothing. But in the end, we see that Abhinavagupta himself says that it's so dangerous, such a personage, that after all it's better to resort to an ordinary normative master rather than to such an exceptional person. Now, I should add something else, but this something else was the topic I proposed to Savita originally, and the topic is about inherited cognitions. Also in inherited cognitions, there is a dialogue. I try to reconstruct a kind of ideal dialogue between Uppaladeva, Dharmakirti, Kumarila, Abhinavagupta about what is inside us, independent of any teaching and of any tradition. So the center of this paper is the concept of prasiddhi, and this prasiddhi is to be taken in a quite different sense as you can find prasiddhi in Indian philosophy in general. So prasiddhi, in a sense, is the voice of the Lord speaking within us. This is another very interesting and important aspect of Kashmir Shaivism. Kashmir Shaivism, particularly non-dual Kashmir Shaivism, while for the Mimamsa the revelation is far away from us, we can't have access to liberation apart from some official, let's say, intermediate. In Kashmir Shaivism, there is a kind of universalization of revelation, and exactly this revelation is something which is in us. So agama is in our heart, as not to be something coming from outside, agama means coming from outside, but this outside in non-dual Shaivism is just inside. So agama comes from inside, not from outside. So this is a universalistic conception of revelation, which is not usual in India, in Indian philosophy, and you can find it at a certain extent only in Bhartrihari, but full-fledged only in non-dual Shaivism. So I think we are touching too many subjects, but just to give an idea of what I'm dealing with currently. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Bene.
So, should we have another paper?
We can have another
Yes.
paper and then the discussion.
Okay.